And speaking of tough matches, Sri Lanka is on a sticky wicket. It is facing its worst economic crisis in history, heading for a record 17th bailout from the IMF. Only Pakistan has taken more bailouts than Sri Lanka, and that should tell you how bad things are. Last night we told you about the situation on the ground, schools cancelling exams because they've run out of paper, embassies being shut because they've run out of budgets, army being deployed at petrol stations because they've run out of fuel. People are dying standing in queues waiting for fuel. A few months ago, Sri Lanka ran out of crude oil. The country's only refinery was shut for 50 days, 50. Nearly 1,000 bakeries had to be closed. They don't have cooking gas. And these stories do not even begin to explain or describe the crisis at hand. Some people are fleeing the country. We told you about this yesterday. So far, 16 Sri Lankan nationals have reached Tamil Nadu in India. And this includes 8 children. They are from Mannar and Jaffna. This could be just the beginning. Reports say Indian intelligence officials have some estimates. They expect at least 2,000 refugees to arrive in the coming weeks. So how did things come to such a pass? How did Sri Lanka drive itself into this? And what is it doing to come out of it? Tonight on Gravitas, we'll discuss the making of Sri Lanka's economic crisis and the man behind it. Our story begins in the year 2007. Mahinda Rajapaksa was Sri Lanka's president at the time. He took a major policy decision, one that would change the trajectory of Sri Lanka's economy. Colombo began borrowing, and borrowing a lot. Government bonds were sold in capital markets. This was 15 years ago. Today, these loans account for 38% of Sri Lanka's debt. And this is the biggest pain point. This was the beginning of Sri Lanka's economic crisis. The loans from China made it worse. And these two were the doing of the Rajapaksas. For Mahinda Rajapaksa, China was an indispensable partner, especially after the war. So when the idea of a port in Hambantota came up, the Chinese were the obvious choice. Beijing, through various means, extended a loan of around $1.3 billion to Sri Lanka. The Hambantota port was built, and we all know how that story ended. Sri Lanka could not pay back the loans. They had to give up the port. China now holds a 99-year-long lease on Hambantota. And this is just one case. It wasn't just Hambantota. Mahinda Rajapaksa was Sri Lanka's president from 2005 to 2015. In this 10-year period, China was involved in 70% of all new infrastructure projects in Sri Lanka. 70%, 70. China was the leading source of financing too. It gave at least $14 billion from 2005 to 2015. How much debt does Colombo owe to Beijing today? According to some estimates, more than $10 billion. That's how much Sri Lanka owes China. A large chunk of these loans were taken by the Rajapaksa government. What explains their preference for China? Beijing was funding more than infrastructure projects. It was also allegedly bankrolling the election campaign of the Rajapaksas. These reports emerged in 2018. In the 2015 election, China was betting on the Rajapaksas to win. It ended up sponsoring their campaign. Large payments were reportedly made to the inner circle of the Rajapaksas. China Harbour Company was the intermediary for these transactions. It is indirectly owned by the Chinese state, this company, China Harbour. It was also involved in the Hambantota project. So how much money are we talking about here? More than $7 million, according to a report. Closer to the elections, China Harbour sent at least $7.6 million. This money was dispersed from a Standard Chartered bank account. It went to the affiliates of the Rajapaksas. 10 days before polling, $3.7 million were distributed in checks. The money was spent on the Rajapaksa campaign. More than $600,000 for campaign T-shirts and campaign promotion material. Another $297,000 to buy gifts for supporters, which includes some saris as well. A payment of $38,000 for a Buddhist monk who was supporting the Rajapaksas. Who was making all these payments? Once again, China Harbour is said to have been involved. Most of these payments came from an account controlled by China Harbour. The account had a distinct name. HPDP Phase 2. That's short for Hambantota Port Development Project Phase 2, HPDP. What does it mean? Was China funding the Rajapaksa campaign to keep a friend in office? Or were funds for Hambantota redirected to the Rajapaksa campaign? It's hard to say. The Rajapaksas, of course, have denied all of these charges. They lost the election in 2015, as it turned out. Then they came back to power in 2019. In the last 3 years, Sri Lanka's economy has been in choppy waters. Experts blame the Rajapaksas for this. Their economic policies led to this crisis, they say. In 2019, President Gotabaya Rajapaksa cut taxes. Sri Lanka's value-added tax was slashed by almost half, from 15% to 8%. The government began printing more money. From 2019 to 2021, money printing increased by 42%. And both of these decisions backfired. Inflation soared to 15%. Sri Lanka now has the worst inflation in Asia. Tax collections dropped. In 2019 and 2020, taxpayers in Sri Lanka declined by over 33%. Budget deficits have soared from 5% to 15%. Of course, just like the rest of the world, the pandemic affected Sri Lanka badly. It battered the economy. But the economic policies of the government have made that shock worse. Critics say they refuse to listen to alternative views or suggestions. This month, 2 key cabinet ministers were sacked. Energy Minister Udaya Gamanapila and Industries Minister Vimal Veeravansa. Why were they sacked? Reports say the 2 ministers openly criticized Finance Minister Basil Rajapaksa. Basil is the younger brother of the president. The SAG lawmakers have made some serious charges against him. I'm going to quote from their statement. This is what they said. Basil Rajapaksa is a US citizen. His family and assets are in the US and he wants to spend his retirement in the US peacefully. The US can arrest him at any moment for money laundering if he refuses to carry out their agenda in Sri Lanka. Therefore, we have a fair doubt if he wants to create crises in the country deliberately. Now, these are some very serious charges. The sacked ministers have promised to back these up with facts to bring out the truth about these allegations, but so far they've not shared anything. Having said that, the writing is on the wall for Sri Lankans. The story of this crisis has many parts: borrowing beyond means, unsustainable infrastructure projects, poor economic policies, lack of foresight and possibly corruption. A series of missteps led to this: a historic economic crisis and a $45 billion mountain of loans. WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.